Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another ResiBuild live stream panel. We're looking forward to a great discussion today about building safety. We're again approaching the topics of the gateway process, gateways 2 and 3. We sat here a year ago talking with the BSR and with a panel of experts, looking at what the situation was then. It was quite a bleak picture there. We're going to be looking at it both as to where we are at the moment and what the next future weeks, months, and the anticipated and upcoming changes will be. As we go through today, we'd be glad of any customer questions and any from any angle of the industry. You can do this by going on to www.sli.do, that's Slido, sli.do, and use hashtag BSR. As we go through the panel, we'll be touching on a series of key questions and some personal experiences from those who have joined us today on the panel. But firstly, I'd like to welcome everyone on the panel, and Ashley, if you could perhaps start by introducing yourself briefly.
Good morning, my name is Ashley Theakston. I'm the head of fire consultancy at a multidisciplinary organisation. I'm in fire engineer for about 12 years. Before that I was a regulatory for about 12 years in regulatory and fire authority.
Thank you, Ashley. Wayne?
Hi, good morning. My name is Wayne Richards. I'm technical manager for Boothon UK. My area of expertise is balconies, roof terraces, and podiums.
And I'm Nick Horton from Sapphire Balconies. We do the balconies, which Wayne doesn't do. This is a modular approach for taller buildings. And I'm also part of the task force looking at the gateway process, which kicked up in Parliament last year as well.
Neil Yeomans. I'm an independent building safety consultant. My background, I'm a chartered environmental health practitioner, so my specialism is in how the built environment in particular impacts people's health and safety. I'm very fortunate to be on an expert advisor to back through the BSR. So I've got a lot of experience in seeing the Building Safety Regulator and how they operate. Another part of my role is I'm also the head of education and building safety for Totus Digital. So real big passion for dealing not just with the building safety aspect but also the competence piece.
Yeah. Dan Norman from Obex, senior specification manager. So I work with architects and designers, also main contractors, subcontractors and so on, in specifying our product correctly to get the maximum benefit from the product. But looking at both aspects, obviously there's the fire and the compliance side of things, but the bigger question which we need to be focusing on is performance, making sure that these buildings work and they're using the right membranes. So that's the main part of what we do.
Good, thanks, Phil. And we're going to start off by looking at some of the statistics. Now, some of you may have already seen these statistics. They're publicly available. So the BSR has categorized their quarterly statistics into the innovation. That's the new model they introduced when they started the transition away from the HSE. That has risen to its highest level it's been at so far. There's 123 applications currently in the system. That is a total of 26,224 units, dwellings if you like. And those which have been approved so far, which accounts for 33% of the ones which have been determined, is 2,336. 33 have been rejected as well, which means that there's a similar number which are currently sitting at a 25-week period. The average approvals, though, is at 18 weeks, which is considerably down from what it's previously been. In the legacy cases, there's now only 3 projects remaining in that, according to the data here. The units in progress still remains just under 900, and the total units determined through that process is, from initially kicking off with the process at the start when the gateways came in, is 7,127. That's a 53% which has been approved. So I want to start off Ashley, perhaps if you kick us off on this, is kind of what's the state of the market? We're putting the finger on the pulse. Where are we at the moment with the gateways, both Gateway 2 and 3, but perhaps mainly at this point in the conversation, Gateway 2?
I mean, much improved. Certainly, personally, I think, and to be honest, I've not been I wouldn't describe it being a vastly experienced where we are with Gateway 2. Obviously, it's a new process, it's new, and also slow to bring in, I suppose. If I was working at that REBA stage, our consultants at the moment are stronger in the retrospectives. So we've certainly worked on Gateway 2 applications for requests of approvals to undertake works, replacement of fire doors, any installation of emergency lighting, extension of fire alarms, something like that, for existing buildings. So certainly where our strength comes from. I think, as you say, it's an improved picture. A number of my engineering colleagues in other consultancies certainly working it through that REBA stage and at that principal Gateway 2 point, and they're seeing certainly a better engagement process and appetite by the BSR to to have that feasibility, to have that early introduction point before the actual Gateway 2 application goes in. So certainly much improved. Yeah.
Interesting. Wayne, how are you finding this process at the moment?
I think that there's a lot more optimism in the marketplace. Before, everybody, because it was new, was kind of naturally cautious, skeptical, maybe a bit pessimistic in terms of the times it would take, how long it would take. I think that's turned the corner now, so people are much more optimistic now that there are projects coming through. I think there's also been a slight shift as well, maybe from people doing high-rise buildings to going for kind of medium-rise because it's easier to get through the process. A lot of large contractors have also changed their models in terms of the types of schemes and buildings they're going for. So they may, instead of going for residential buildings, they may well think, okay, well, we're going to do partner with housing associations, or we're going to do data centers, or we're going to do commercial spaces. So a lot of them have adapted, which means that the amount of residential productivity may come through as being slightly reduced in the next few years until people are familiar with the gateways, and I guess a lot of the contractors will move back into that space.
Yeah, so the challenges of the process kind of moving people away from it, obviously the opposite direction of where the 1.5 million homes which the government have promised is suggesting we should be going. I was also talking with a investor who looks at the modelling of financial modelling. I met them at the House of Parliament a couple of weeks back, and they were talking there about the difficulty and challenges of modelling financially at present, because we are seeing green shoots. Be interested in the other viewpoints on this as well. But whilst there are green shoots, certainty is what the investors are kind of trying to model out. And do they plugging the old legacy ones with the assumption that the new innovation model will become that, or do they take a more positive approach? It's a really difficult question to answer. But before we perhaps tackle some of those more difficult questions, Dan, what's your take on the market at the moment?
Yeah, interesting. No, thanks. It's a very good question. Quite lively, I think. What we've seen, it kind of feels like we've got a new year and everyone's kind of had a bit of a reset and bought into the new regime or the changes or the shake up or whatever you want to call it within the BSR.
The CLG. And within that now.
And they've embraced that and given it another shot, if you like. It's like it's had a new kind of, it's reinvented itself in people's minds, which I think is really good. So we are seeing applications come through. We're also seeing a much more positive mindset to it. So as the industry and most of the people I talk to would be architects and so on, as they're getting more familiar with the process and getting their heads around it, they're approaching it much more positively. So the way I see it is anything that can move in a more positive direction along with that is going to add to that positivity, and it's going to build. Because at the end of the day, we need to buy into this process. It's not going away. So whatever happens, we need to buy into it. And those that are buying into it are having success. And I think there's a lot about it is mindset. So yeah, no, it's positive.
Interesting. And that tells up. I spoke to Charlie Pugsley, the CEO of the BSR, a few weeks back, and asked him a bit about balconies as well. And they mentioned we've been involved in 36 different applications. That's growing all the time, obviously, for Gateway 2. But the thing he mentioned about some of the pieces where people have been pushed back and rejected on applications, fortunately not ones we've been involved in, but was that kind of mindset of actually looking at the product in isolation, not thinking about the interfaces and how that corresponded with other parts of the building. So it's really important we're considering these considerations at the start is how are we interfacing, and ultimately the principal contractor, principal developers should be bringing these conversations, these collaborative discussions forward to the start of the project and early stage before gateways or even anticipated gateway application is going in. But Neil, interested in your viewpoint.
Yeah, I mean, just to build off what you just said, I think the shoe that hasn't quite yet dropped, because I agree with you, there are green shoots. There's some emerging good practice, particularly around creating a dynamic golden thread throughout the design process and other aspects. But the shoe that hasn't dropped yet for me, that I hope the sector will get there over the next few months, is to stop seeing the gateway process as a tick box exercise, and actually for people to see, you mentioned earlier, seeing products as silos and various different teams as silos. Actually, that if you look at what the Building Safety Act was supposed to achieve and is targeted as achieving, it's got one real big outcome. The residents should be able to be living in a safe property.
Yeah.
And the principal council person should be able to demonstrate that is true. And the Building Safety Regulator has to be assured that everything that should be in place is in place.
Yeah.
So that shoe that I mentioned that needs to drop that's never really going to fully happen until the designers and the construction companies understand they need to look at this gateway process, but also the entire concept of applying the Building Safety Act from the lens of the end product users. Yeah. So that's both the residents and the PAP, but also the Building Safety Regulator.
Serving the purpose.
Exactly. It's okay asking what boxes do I need to tick, but actually probably the quickest way to get to finding out what boxes need to be ticked is, well, what is the PAP going to need to do a really good building safety case? What is the Building Safety Regulator going to need in order to satisfy themselves that I've honoured everything that's in the in the gateway process? The BSR released, it was about 5-6 months ago now, a webinar about their early thought processes around the gateway process, and they were quite clear. The number one thing they're craving is a narrative. For the construction teams to hold their hand through the journey, the story of this is how I know these buildings are going to be safe, because I'm designing them safely with safety in mind. I'm constructing them with safety in mind, and those are our priorities. So that for me, yes, there are some green shoots, and I think a lot of that is just familiarity with some processes. The real big shift that would transform the sector to what it should and could be is that, remember, we're here to build safe properties, not tick gateway boxes.
And that's a really valid point, though, that this actually came up in the gateway discussion last time, about GCSE exam papers saying show your workings, right? And that being the piece there, but the BSR,
how did you get to that answer?
Exactly. So the workings are what are more important than that, and putting that in the context of balconies, it's the loadings we're talking about here. demonstrating why that is safe, and the test records and so on of fire performance, which are making a difference. So making sure you've got good quality information around the products, but also, as you say, the signposting to that information. However, as you say, it's not about the marking. This isn't an exam paper being marked. It is a gateway process whereby they want to see that you've satisfied them, that you are comfortable with that, and you've pointed the right people in the job. How do you find this in practice, Wayne? What does this actually look like? Do you find some of the applications, they are still looking at a tick box approach? How are you finding it more generally?
I think it depends on the kind of entry point to the question. So if you're speaking to, let's say, an architect at REBA Stage 3, having safety in mind, best practice, developing comprehensive and coherent specifications, this is quite an easy process, and you have full engagement, and there is because of no cost, there is a kind of best practice approach, and hopefully the golden thread will tackle this, because as the project or building moves through the REBA cycle, you then start getting other factors and other inputs coming in. So a good example would be at specification stage. Landscape architects don't work necessarily in the same way as REBA architects. REBA have a very kind of rigid CPD systems. Landscape architects don't. When a project gets novated over to the landscape architect to look after an area, they will then put their influence onto it, but they won't not necessarily understand, or in some cases agree with all of that logic and thought that went into the initial design, and they have slightly different priorities. On these bigger schemes that we're talking about, Gateway 2 and 3, they normally have several processes, even at the design phase, because the client might have their own design team or technical teams, but also when it goes to the main contractor, a lot of them have their own kind of in-house design and technical. And again, so you kind of have a watering down effect, not necessarily intentionally. It's just because people are working from different points of view.
The drivers at that time is more time, isn't it? Time frame, because they're starting at end of 4, starting at construction, need to get it, to get it started, kind of thing.
It's program
more
and
time there,
and it's cost. But I'm trying to kind of like not put the responsibility just because of program or cost, because I think there's a process issue, and the golden thread should hopefully be the thing that knits this all together, so that when we hand to the next stage and the next stage and the next stage, some of the integrity of the design at the start, where all of that thought and best practices and safety first that was designed into those specifications are there as a baseline.
Are procured and installed.
But architects can't know everything about every part of the building. So there is a specialist bit, let's say a facade, and you have a facade contractor who are the experts, and they are the ones with competency, that the specification evolves. It doesn't necessarily change, or we could do it cheaper, or this is faster. It's, okay, there's the baseline. Now, how can we evolve that? And I think when those behaviours are adopted, Gateway 2 and 3 will become really easy, because they'll see it, excuse the pun, as building blocks. Not necessarily as a yes or no, or right or wrong. Or
it might be the approvals point, but as you say, it's a process and not a point in time, is it? It's a Gateway 2 and 3 process, same as the one.
There's clearly an obligation to appoint competent people. That's a obligation of the Building Safety Act, isn't it? And this is not about understanding if they've got qualification A or B. If you look at Grenfell, most of the people involved in that discussion had the qualifications. This is about making sure you've got the behavioural piece and the full SCEB, not just the knowledge, if you like.
Registrations.
And demonstrating that in a way which is not a tick box. How do we actually achieve that? And Neil, I'm going to come to you on this because I thought that the example you were telling us about earlier about speaking and Dame Hackett on the kind of recipe piece. Can you tell us a little bit about that and your thoughts on that?
In terms of the golden thread and aspects like that.
And the recipe analogy.
Yeah, so for my, as I mentioned earlier, for my sins, I'm chartered in environmental health. So the built environment isn't the only thing that I've been trained in over the years. One of the aspects that we all, just to get qualified in chartership, we have to do food safety. And one of the messages that I always try to give anyone in having a look at the Building Safety Act is we don't necessarily need to reinvent all of the wheels. There are wheels out there that we can adopt. So when you look at how food safety works, you don't necessarily need to have every single understanding of absolutely everything that's happening in a recipe. You've got to have, as an industry, what you end up having is you have competent, trained staff making decisions about certain ingredients. And what is a building other than an ingredient list? It's an ingredient list that you put together in a recipe to come out the other end of it. And what the way that food safety is managed, particularly, you look at everything from oysters through to sausages, there's a lot of safety aspects along there. What they do is they implement something called HACCP, so Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points, which is a risk management model, not a tick box model. And I think the thing I always try and encourage people to do is the Building Safety Act, if it's anything, it is the attempt of the government to move from a tick box arrangement. Dame Judith, if everyone goes and has a look at page 6 of her interim report, so literally the first thing out the door, she said that the problem I'm seeing with the construction sector is everyone's racing to the bottom. Everyone wants to have a culture of achieving the bare legal minimum compliance standard, i.e. tick box exercise. That's not the way other safety functions work, from occupational health and safety through to food safety through to anything else. So to get people's mind into a risk management mindset and understand about risk management through a process, that's one of the key things that the Building Safety Regulator and the end client's going to crave.
Yeah. Because
ultimately that is telling the story, because you can't manage risk unless you can explain how the hazard is being mitigated from becoming the consequence. You have to understand it in a very different level. Coming back to your point earlier about the golden thread knitting things together, and also competence, and bringing it back to the narrative piece that I think is really important. If you're looking at a facade specialist, one of the things that any specialist in this process should be looking at is, what other people are going to rely on my information. So I need to see it through, whoever's going to rely on this information, they're going to need to understand it. So rather than me being hyper technical to talk to effectively other facade specialists, I need to understand that I'm going to have to put some sort of executive summary narrative around it, because the people erecting the facade aren't my only client now. My other clients are the Building Safety Regulator and the PAP. So I need to make the information narratively accessible and understandable to them. And so I waffled off on a completely different rabbit hole, but ultimately you don't necessarily need to reinvent wheels. We're a storytelling species. As long as if we look at how to tell the story of how our piece of work impacts the safety of this building, through both now and into the future, actually that will get us a long way to achieving what the Building Safety Act's requiring.
What you touched on is something I mentioned in one of the construction industry task force meetings, and it's a good idea, and it's to do with language and interfaces and other trades. So when you submit a tender, if there was a standard format in the industry where you had an executive summary, but you also had a competency statement that you have to submit with your tender, you're basically declaring, I'm competent to do these works because of, and you put, why. You're basically justifying why you should win that package in a very way that you have the competency. But yeah, you're right. If there was an executive summary that spoke to in more plain English, it would be better for the building. So if we were doing like a podium, you can have an instance where you've got the concreting contractors, you've got roofing contractors, you can have people doing surface finishes, you can have landscapers doing planters, you can have electricians doing lighting,
renewables,
all of those kind of things. And if they all on their tender packs all had an executive summary in plain English, as well as their a competency statement, everybody will know what they're talking about, what they're doing, and the main contractor can see who they need to go to answer questions.
It's a responsibility matrix, so it falls into that, isn't it?
We've had a couple of questions as well coming through from the audience, and thank you for everyone who has asked a question. Don't forget you can ask it at www.sli.do using hashtag BSR. Now, one of the questions which relates to this process is, do we agree the harder the gateway process is, the more and correct information is being entered, therefore ultimately making this a safer process in the long run? My kind of take on that is we've just been talking about it not being a tick box exercise. There has got to be a benchmark which is far higher than the previous process of everyone checking it off. But at the same time, I guess there's a bit of a myth to address here, is that everyone is not trying to submit the least amount of information. There are some which may be doing that, but there's certainly a bunch of people which are approaching it with the mindset, as you're saying, it's looking at the risk, bringing together parties collaboratively. I'd be interested in the viewpoints of the panel on that particular question. Do you want to start us off, Dan?
Just run the question again, just so that...
Do we agree the harder the gateway process is, the more and correct information is being entered, therefore ultimately making this a safer process in the long run?
Yeah, interesting question. I don't know how to answer that really. To view it as hard, I think is probably a bit
more complex.
Yeah,
rather than harder.
Yeah, more complex maybe, but again, I think it comes back to what you've been saying, that we need to have, and this has really impacted me, we need to have the end goal in mind. The Building Safety Act is there to make and to implement or to force maybe a cultural shift in the industry. And what is that cultural shift? It is to build, we are accountable for the built environment. And if people die in that built environment, we are responsible. As people that have, and right down to the individuals, we have influenced the design of that building. We've implemented the fire strategy or whatever it is. We put products into that. We are responsible. And I, whenever I've spoken to Dame Judith, I've very much got that impression. Or one time she said to me, I was talking to her about regulation in relation to membranes. She said, "Look, you guys know what to do. I've given you the instructions. Go and do it." And I think, that's really, we've got to embrace this. I sometimes think that it's a bit like you go through an exam or a test and you get your certificate, and then you put that in a picture frame on the wall. Great, I haven't got to worry about that for 12 months. But like with your example as to the food industry, they're getting regulated all the time, and you go to takeaways and you've got fast food ratings. That's the kind of mindset we need to get into. so that we're
And-
constantly challenging ourselves.
and
Are
have
we
been
doing it right?
prosecuted as well at the same time, which obviously is yet to really come through in what's happening. Certainly, some of the behaviours of people appointing people because we've got a very cheap price on it,
Yeah.
or you perhaps bully the supply chain into doing a design upfront FOC just because they're the small people on the block. But certainly, that kind of mentality we're likely to see being prosecuted. To see, for those who haven't come across it yet, the CPR released a white paper a couple of weeks ago now, which takes it to the next stage of actually having a super regulator joining together what ultimately the BSR and the OPSS are both looking at, but to make enforcement a very real thing and have the powers to request test information and be able to drill into test results and so on. So we're avoiding that. But in terms of that mindset piece, I mean, we're certainly seeing that there are a lot of collaborative companies.
Yeah.
We're seeing a more positive and collaborative approach up front on projects, people being very mindful of that approach. It's not like, if they're working through that, there's a lot of risk adverse people in the industry now, which is good. And doing things properly is definitely becoming the norm, not the tick box piece in there. So be interested if that's what you're seeing. Actually, you're obviously agreeing with that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I remember speaking to a colleague a few years ago and looking at scores on the doors, for buildings that have a rating mechanism against the safety case process. In the lobbies of buildings and things, and particularly hotels, because that hospitality, where you've maybe got a choice to go somewhere else, and, as you would do for the restaurant business. But yeah, I was going to say about those declarations of competence, bringing it back round to that sort of the SCIB scenarios. We're certainly having that pretty much most everything that's to go with a declaration of competence these days. Not just about a couple of case studies that you've done before. Actually, how have you done that? What did you do within that process, within that project?
Yeah.
And it's not just that individuals. They worked on that. Actually, what did the team work on that? It wouldn't be just a single point fire engineer, single point of contact fire engineer working through those REBA stages. And with a movement of people in the industry, it may not see them all through anyway. But yeah, so that fire engineer might involve a couple of other fire engineers in their team through those stages, not just an early stage gateway 1, fire statement. That might have been done by might be a different fire engineer looking at the technical stage, doing fire modelling perhaps.
And that's
so
the
it's a team, and not just an individual.
And that's the structure of how the Building Safety Act's been done, isn't it? Intentionally, with individuals taking responsibility there. You've got your client, you've got your principal contractor, principal designer, with legal obligations, and the appointment of people like balcony designers, like membrane designers, or other facade elements. The appointment of those people, it needs to be both organisational and personal competence, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And that's why I see that that understanding the brief. Why is the client ringing you up and saying, "We want you involved in the project"? Okay, what is the project? Where do you want to get to? What is it at the end you want? Actually, I need you to support us in the Gateway 2 retrospective strategy, Gateway 2 process. Okay, well, I know who the reader's going to be of this document I'm going to write. And you write it in that sense to enable them to understand the building they're being presented to, and why and how, and that they should approve. They're okay to approve this.
And if you start with the end in mind, particularly, I mean, from our experience in balconies, if you're starting with that aspiration, you're understanding what is the aspirations of it, not just from a aesthetic point of view, but the aspirations from the passive vision, for example, or the various other safety aspects of it. You then work out what the unique challenges is that interfaces, is that the site logistics and the build process of that, and making sure you've got the right people involved in that, and that they're talking together. But once you understand those aspirations, those challenges, you can streamline it and actually save you a lot of cost and carbon at the same time. So these things work together as well. It's not that actually you lose the competitiveness by not being able to tender post post-gateway process. And I wanted to come on to a question, Dan, for you, is that we have a situation where Gateway 2 has approved a specific product, but the contractor has proceeded with an alternative and submitted a notifiable change, which makes it a Class B instead of a Class A. Is that acceptable? Viewpoints, Dan?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and we get this with membranes a lot, and it comes back to something you were saying earlier, that it very much bears on the end goal. So we're seeing a lot of insurers, clients, funders saying we must have non-combustible facades. Well, it doesn't exist, but the point is that's their aspiration. That's what they want to go to, and the reason is because of risk. So it gets down to the contractor level, goes through Gateway 2, and this, you get a project that goes through at Class A because the architect says, no, that's the way we need to go. It's above and beyond, we're future proofing, and that's what we think the client wants. Gets to site, and oh dear, we haven't allowed for it, or it's coming out too expensive. And some of the tier 2 contractors can tend to say they haven't quite got their arms around the whole change control process. And it's really important that they understand what's notifiable and what is major, but not just, as we've said earlier, tick box exercise, but why it's different.
Yeah.
Because you can't go from a Class A to a Class B. You can, but you've got to understand the difference between the two performances in relation to fire, and how the Building Safety Regulator are going to look at that. You're actually increasing the risk because you're going from A to B. And they said to me once, not too long ago, said, look, it's all about managing risk. If you're going to put a combustible membrane in a facade, it's clearly not the right thing to do. But if you're going to do that, and then you're going to tell me the way I'm going to manage that risk is I'm going to have a fireman on every floor 24/7, 365. That's how we can see that you are managing that risk. We're not going to tell you to take that risk away exactly. We want to know how you're going to manage that risk. Yeah. So it's not about what we can get away with, and it's not about putting our toe in the water and seeing what BSR comes back with. Because if I've already started building, you're going to be in a problem.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, and so for the person who asked the first questions, if you was to change the terminology from hard, and let's just say, does more data entry points mean that you will get safer buildings? And the answer would be yes, because we know more about it. And then
as long as the right points as well.
Yeah, but the more information you have, it comes back to then we are going to have safer buildings because we can manage risk better, which brings us on to this part. Again, when it comes to notifiable changes, it's lots of if we use an analogy from roofing, there used to be ratings that were like AA, AB, AC, and BB, etc. But they were quite transparent and easy to understand because you knew where the risk was and how the risk was. By going to some of these harmonized standards, it's really good in some ways. In other ways, it makes it harder to understand what the risk is and where the risk is. Yeah. So we need to have more data entry points in terms of being able to get an engineered decision is acceptable. If a fire engineer signs it off, you're good to go. If you have a combustible membrane, for example, sandwiched between two concrete elements and it's never going to see a flame ever or never going to get enough heat, and there is no source of oxygen for it, you've broken this triangle of fire and the risk is going to be very low. So it's knowing where and how to identify it and to say, is it risk? Is it not a risk? And the insurers to go.
I was about to touch on that. Risk is about reducing liability, not just life safety or building safety risk. It's risk, as I say, when being built and products, is making that change actually from 2018. No, it's no more. Yes, we can deal with legacy for the next 20 years, but actually from 2018, we're no longer using that product and we're no longer building buildings like we did, but we're still tidying up. the HSE risks of that.
I'm going to jump in and move the conversation on slightly. We've obviously been focusing about Gateway 2 primarily. Gateway 3 is perhaps one of the bigger concerns in people's minds right now, because of the nature that we've had very few. And I think actually you mentioned there's about 5 which have passed through. The very first one in the country to pass through was a scheme in Quintain scheme, which was built by CISC and Horwath Tompkin Architects. There's actually going to be a ResiBuild podcast going out in a few weeks on that one. CISC unfortunately dropped out of the panel along with one of our other members. But what we do know about that one is that there was some teething issues as it went through. We've obviously had a handful go through. They have gone through quicker than the initial Gateway 2 ones have gone through. But looking at the Gateway 3, are we at risk of Gateway 3 becoming the new Gateway 2? And the question here from one of the audience is, do we anticipate the same sort of problems with Gateway 3 as there have been with Gateway 2? Do we think a better job will be done with less delays? I'm guessing the better job done is in the context of the BSR managing that process there. But Neil, what's your thoughts on that?
Actually, I think this question and the previous one we were answering about whether the more information is required, and is it what assurances are you going to need to give if you're going to be changing products? I actually think these 3 questions are very, very closely interrelated. And again, I'll come back to one of the solutions I'd provide is if you put yourselves in the shoes of the Building Safety Regulator, you'll very quickly start to understand how to avoid the inevitable pitfalls that will arise. So the Building Safety Regulator's role in Gateway 3 is to make sure, simplify it massively, but in a nutshell, they've got to make sure that what was designed has been built. That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
And the product's safe. Now, if you make changes through that process, so the previous question, if you make a change through that, you imagine all of the things then, effectively the person at Gateway 3, if they notice a change, they've got to unpack everything from Gateway 2 because changing that membrane is going to have knock-on impacts throughout the piece. It potentially even invalidates the principal designer. Even just something as simple as the principal designer's statements, it's no longer actual holds water. So moving towards Gateway 3, my strongest advice is, right, if you imagine yourself as the Building Safety Regulator, any regulator, you've got a couple of ex-regulators, gamekeepers on the table, will tell you that actually, whether we like it or not, there's a spectrum of
acceptance,
of confidence. There's a confidence spectrum when you have a look at any documentation.
Yeah.
If you're given a nice warm sense of being able to trust, because there's a really good competence statement, the people that have been involved in this project are highly credentialed and have good experience and actually even talk through the behavioural piece. If they have things like BS 9997 accreditation, if they've done the golden thread work, gone through ISO 19650 and done some really good golden thread work, if they've told the story of how that building, how we have, I forget who coined the phrase now. It was one of the guys on a previous BSR seminar. They said we need to stop doing design and build. We need to do design then build.
Yeah.
So if you crystallise that for the regulator and tell them a story, what happens is you as a regulator, you're a human. You're going to start to trust what's in the document. If you don't give them that narrative and you don't give them that warm sense, the thing lower on the confidence scale, you trust here is here. The next thing down is transparency.
Yeah.
So then you ask the question after question after question, because you now don't trust the documents enough. You're going to have to. Your spidey senses have gone off. I need more transparency. So comes back to the previous question. You don't necessarily need more information. What you need to do is you need to package it in a way that gives
Could understand that
the
information.
answers that the BSR are asking. And the BSR is asking, how do you know this building is being designed safely and built safely? So it comes back to that original statement I made. If you get yourself out of the head of an architect, out of the head of an engineer, and into the head of a BSR regulator and the PAP, and design it through that prism, you'll end up saving a lot of grief at both stage 2 and stage 3.
And what you say is a brilliant example of that. We're moving away from this mindset that we've had a legal obligation under Regulation 38 to have as built.
Right. It's already there, isn't it? It was
But
there,
an
wasn't
as
it?
built was only as intended to be built, rather than a genuine as built in many cases. The reality is we're moving into a process which is now being checked, and those questions will come out off the back of it. But there's also huge benefit, particularly from product manufacturers. I mean, at Sapphire, we've certainly seen the benefit of it. We have our own digital golden thread. We call it Passport. Theory being like a passport, your balcony's not moving to the next stage until it's been signed off, right? But by holding that information on the checks and linking it back to the competence and the records related to the people, but also seeing stage by stage by stage, it also enables us to then train AI to assess the completeness of welds and that sort of thing, and improve that our own processes and make sure that we are demonstrating both in a way which could be shown at Gateway 3, but also improving our own quality and the outcome of the products. And that is a huge benefit which people shouldn't be looking at as necessarily a negative. Investing in the right processes and structure and approach from a digital golden thread can be a big benefit to you as a business as well. And certainly as a manufacturer, we would certainly recommend that the questions being asked by contractors, they're going through that. It's can you answer the questions which the regulators might ask in the future? As do you actually have change records there? Do you have that golden thread of information on your balcony, facade, membrane, whatever the product is? Can the person you're using actually be able to demonstrate that? That is part of being a competent organisation, isn't it? Is having that investment into good quality controls and so on.
Yeah. And the BSR actually said to us last year, they said that what we want people to do is start with Gateway 3 and then work out your Gateway 2.
How do I get there?
From that. So that is and kind of run the two together, because if you think about it, if you run the two together right from the start, you've already signed off your Gateway 3 before you even got there. And I thought that was really good advice.
Some other kind of good advice on this question it would be, unfortunately, in our sector, we have a couple of really good trade associations, the Liquid Roofing and Waterproofing Association and the Single Ply Roofing Association. They are helping in terms of best practice, standard details, given more and more kind of advice and guidance that is based across the whole sector. So I think this is an underused resource, and that if you're employing competent people or competent roofing contractor in this example, then a competent roofing contractor, you would expect them to be members of a trade association, and you'd expect their employees to belong to either things like the CIOB or the ICM, or they would have some kind of professional body that they're doing ongoing training with, that they're getting technical support from. And I think that a lot of designers and tier one contractors, a lot of them forget that they can actually join and participate in trade associations. You can be associated members or affiliated members, and you can get information, you can get standard details, you can get understanding of the processes, because a lot of these trade associations are interacting directly with government or, the Ministry for Community Health and Government. It's an underused resource, and the more people kind of think, well, that's a good idea. I'm getting the information from the trade association. As that culture spreads, it will make the submissions much easier because they're going from proven and routes. They're following in the footsteps of others rather than trying to trailblaze their way through it.
So there's obviously some products which fall outside of that. At the moment, don't have balconies being one of those, as you'd know. But there's certainly a lot of change coming with the CPR. The anticipation, and they've confirmed this in the white paper now, that every product will be under the scrutiny of an assessing body. That includes what is brought to market, the product information, etc. That's obviously going to drive a certain amount of change and so on in the industry as well. But really, understanding how things are changing is a responsibility that any person has in their role. And if an architect, I'm just thinking of some simple takeaways here for an architect or contractor or somebody who's looking at that. Join the conversations, speak to the people which know what's going on in their industry, because you can learn so much. And the majority of companies are happy to collaborate and talk at an early stage in a product, and give some steer on what's happening. And certainly with the gateways, we obviously saw the first Gateway 2 applications were quite varied, the responses between one part and another. Now, I know the BSR has obviously reshaped that under Andy Rowe and so on, looking at getting more consistent feedback.
And the presentation of that, and as you said, he's talking about the document management, the document control, and rather than a series of architects drawing numbers or whatever. Actually, where does that relate to? Forms an index. This is an index. Actually, this drawing relates to this, the facade, elevation number, or whatever.
Yeah. Because I know there's different organisations which have, Reba, RICS, various organisations have worked on sort of summarising product information, but in reality, the people which work under roofing, for example, or balconies and membranes and so on, are going to know their products, or they jolly well should know their products better than any other person in an organisation like that. So it is about bring those collaborative discussions to the table, isn't it?
I think a good example would be when acoustic regulations came out, Part E. It was quite a complex thing for people to get their heads around, but there was something called robust standard details.
Yeah.
And what this did was reduce the need for acoustic testing across a large site, because you're not testing every unit. You can test basically sample unit. I'm paraphrasing, but you can test sample units from across the face and tick. Now, if there were some, let's call them robust standard details for facades, for balconies, you have maybe somebody, a trade association like Inca that deals with facades and this kind of thing, and balconies were brought into some of these different things, then without every manufacturer can still keep their intellectual properties, they can still be the experts, they're still going to be the main source of competencies, but what you will have are common best practices, common principles in terms of, for example, we were speaking earlier about using silicon as your last line of defense around windows on a high rise. It's going to be impossible to maintain, etc., etc. Likewise with some of these membrane details that you see, they've got to match the life of the building. So whether the trade associations and these robust standard details will help is that you are giving principles that are kind of industry-led, tested, and it makes it much easier to get the trust and the confidence when you're now speaking to a building safety regulator that here is a body of organisations that have tested and proven a way of how to do a detail. And this goes back to what you were saying in terms of, so the trust level is going to be quite high now, but it also means that all the manufacturers can kind of work to those principles, in their own way, and make it easier to specify, make it easier for it to then go into the golden thread through the architect at stage 2 or stage 3, and then work its way onto site, because everybody knows the robust standard detail is it should be done this way. Hold on, that doesn't look like it's been done right, because this is how the industry, do it across multiple sites.
And that's what I'd there's a strategic piece. When we focus in on ad hoc Gateway 2 and Gateway 3 applications. We sort of lose the bigger picture. The bigger picture that the gateway process is supposed to be dealing with is the inability for regulators to trust our sector to do what we're supposed to do properly.
Yeah.
And so the bigger piece is, yes, there's a cultural element, but there is also a methodological issue that construction is one of the very few examples I'm aware of where the people that manufacture, build a product, then don't have any skin in the game after handover.
Delivery of the product.
I think soft landings, whether BSR, government soft landings, whatever, I don't care, has got to have its day at some point, because it's one of the few ways that manufacturers, installers, all of that actually learn about whether their product and their designs at stage 2 have actually stood the test of time. Because it's again another risk of turning gateways into a tick box exercise. The whole point of the gateway process is supposed to that it's safe after. So if the building is supposed to be lasting for 100, 150 years, I need to know that building is going to be safe. You mentioned membranes are going to last the life cycle of the building. Unless we have a look at the real experts that manufacture and install these things, look at how they're performing after handover. How are we ever going to plan, do, check, act, and have that continuous improvement?
I think if I can jump in here and just mention, the UK Construction Industry Task Force has actually started this process of looking at the primarily 4 gateways, but actually working back is actually trying to map the problems that has arisen across different product types. I think it could be a very valuable piece if we can get the BSR to show and demonstrate some of the challenges they're seeing, or people's maybe lack of competence in demonstrating certain detailing, but also warranty providers and HPC and housing associations and people which are seeing these issues in day-to-day context, and bring, these are the risks which are happening in the marketplace, but also this is best practice from decent, competent companies. Together,
it needs to be benchmarking, doesn't it? It needs to be transparent. Benchmarking would be
absolutely
helpful, and to know actually what is complex, what is the depth of information, and the ought to be providing, or they're expecting that. What they don't want is there's a tomb. Right, there might be 600 pages required, but that's clearly going to take some time and a team resource to be able to do that. They need to know when that's landing for them, so they can place the resources ready for that 600-page document arriving. That they've only got to put together because there's no clear document control index, maybe.
And if there was a very defined format that would help with question 1, how many data points do we know, for example, then when they say, it should take 12 weeks or 16 weeks, if it's standardized information with standardized details, you can then give a reasonable time. How long is reasonable to read a 600-page document? How long is reasonable to write a 600-page? And then you can get realistic timings, because some of the timings that you see, I would say, are a bit unrealistic in the first place, and then people lose confidence. But there was never a realistic, time frame from the beginning.
And when we're talking about timing in the context of gateways, we've got to be mindful that the pressure to kind of get an application in might lead to some information not going in. But the reality is, if you're missing out certain key information, you're probably going to be asked about earlier because you lose confidence. As you say, those questions will start coming out. How have you done this? How have you done that? And you'll then be providing it at very short notice.
Exactly.
The flip side of it, we did mention at the beginning, was the timescales. We've seen quite a decrease. It was up at 52 or 3 weeks this point last year. We're seeing it come down to 18, and we're glad that's come down to 18. But let's not forget, 12 was the actual benchmark that they were there. And I happened to read an article, was published in January last year. It was in a magazine. I just happened to come across it this last week, where it talked about the BSR have ambitions to get down to 5 weeks now.
I don't think that's realistic. I mean, I personally get some tenders for some schemes. and I can't go through the tender in 5 weeks. So how are they going to do the whole building? So that's what I mean about realistic expectations.
Yeah.
You know, if somebody says we're going to build 1 million houses, that's great. You know, I don't think you can complete a house sale in like less than 3 months. So now you've got 9 months, and you know that's never going to be something that's built from now. It's going to be something that's already long in the pipeline. So figures and statistics are great, but they have to be managed carefully, because they can artificially give the market confidence, and they can artificially
or not.
sap the confidence, and it becomes a dangerous thing where you have you know, spikes in optimism and spikes in people with confidence drops, and really they were never realistic to start off with.
And as you know, the consultation which was done by the task force on that identified some pretty shocking financial stresses on companies involved, particularly SMEs involved in the in their revenue being locked up in gateway processes. Now
Remediation.
that's been going back in to government, but the reality is we're also expecting these companies to start adopting new test standards in line with CPR, various investment from a competence point of view. It is a challenge, and getting that balance right as a business is not an easy.
I'm sure if the SME went at the start of the project, or the project at the start went into the funders and said, this is going to take 72 weeks. And they went, God, that's a long time, but okay. And they put their funding geared around 72 weeks, then a lot of those SMEs wouldn't have as much trouble as that they're having. But going in there saying, oh, we need funding and it's going to be over the course of 30 weeks, and it's not, then the confidence has dropped for the funder, and that's why it's so dangerous, the unrealistic expectations at the start, because
Funder wants to see return, don't they? A reasonable time frame to enable their return.
If they were told
the return is the sale of the house
at the start, then the funding, the interest, the insurance, everything can be can be put in place. Once it's put in place and you start changing it, and that's when confidence changes. And that's the thing, because you're now in a cash flow battle.
And if you take the risk too far out and you're saying it's going to be 72 weeks, it can make certain types of buildings unviable, because that period of time, and this is the sort of dilemma we've currently got with that. But just I want to.
That's not such a bad thing, by the way, because when you see companies like ISG, Henry Construction, all of these developers going bust, it would have been better for them not to start those buildings in the first place if they were unviable. You've got situations like around Ealing where they are demolishing buildings that are 80% complete and at different stages of completion, where if they were unviable, then they shouldn't have been built, or they shouldn't have been built in that way, or something different should have been done. So the modelling would have been correct.
It's an interesting point, but at the same time, house buildings at historic low when the demand is massive and the targets are huge. So that's a balance. Obviously, we're not going to be able to address in the next few minutes. But I'm just going to jump onto a few of the close out a few of the questions which have come through. Neil, this one is in relation to you talk about the HACCP approach. And a methodology around that. Is anyone working on a methodology that gives the standard approach a better understanding of what good looks like?
Not around HACCP. I lost the debate on HACCP. I still think it's the way that I would go. There's a lot of work around bow tie analysis and other risk management models. I don't think they're dynamic enough. I think HACCP's the best route. It's just I don't think that's gonna fly. So some of the other stealing a wheel rather than inventing a wheel stuff, I'm similar sort of ilk. I know there are product companies now looking at the same way the music industry tracks music. In the same route, they're thinking about using that to track products and competence. So if you think about when you're streaming a song, you've got all of the contributors. You've got to delegate, you've got to distribute the costs, how many times it's played, and there's actually quite a lot of familiarity between the way music proliferates out, and you have to make sure that every single person gets their little bit of change out of it, their little bit of money out of it, from the manufacturer of the music, the producer of the music, all the way through to the singer songwriter and whoever did it.
Yeah.
It's actually quite similar to the way that construction works. So there's a few people trying to use that as a bit of a scaffold. But HACCP, I'm afraid, I'd love if anyone fancies having a hack at it, I'd love to try it. But it's a fight I lost a few years ago.
Okay, thanks. Next question here was why are we not considering that all designers should produce as a foundation an accurate design risk assessment? This is what the intent states.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on this?
No, I think as part of the REBA process, I know not all buildings are full under REBA, but certainly the Gateway 2 and 3 type buildings will have that. As part of the planning approval and the stage 1 and stage 2 processes, there are bits in there to do with the risk and the environmental impact and all of those kind of things as part of the planning proposal in the first place. Maybe it needs evolving or sharpening up or something like that, but that is really early on and can be held with an architect that specializes in planning. So it might not necessarily be the architect you're dealing with by the time it gets to site, which could be a landscape architect, a smaller practice, a specialist. But I do think that there is an element of that already.
Yeah.
Within the plan, within the planning stage, town and country planning and the likes, isn't it? And that feasibility, feasibility, REBA 0, 1 and the like, isn't it?
Yeah. The next question, it says not so much a question, more a statement. It seems more pressure on Gateway 3 will come with PBSA projects due to September deadlines for student intake. This needs all stakeholders to get around the table very early to agree the delivery plan. Any comments?
I think it's but when you have fixed points like term times or like budgets and reports, it's very hard to combine those with the real construction world in the process they do. They try to force these deadlines and force those kind of things. But if you want safety first approach, buildings that are designed safely, and all of the things that we were talking about right at the very start, then that has to take priority into is it this September or next September? Or
you're not trying to falsify the delivery, a safe delivery, by having a deadline like that.
You're going to, like Neil pointed out, you're going to leave something out in your application and then it might come back with questions and that. So if it's safety first and best practice first and all of those, term times should be secondary, the change of government should be secondary, the budget should be secondary.
I think on this, if you've got something at a deadline like that you've got to hit, the Gateway 2 has got to be absolutely nailed down with the developer properly. So there's no, D&B wouldn't work because it's design is build as we go, design as we go, isn't it? And that's the reality of it. So if you can nail down Gateway 2, so the developer or the builder's got to be involved, contractor's got to be involved right at that early stage, so that everything that comes out of Gateway 2 is going to go in, like, there's no disagreements, there's no arguments, there's no messing around with the budget because it doesn't quite fit. It's all got to be set out, and then you stand a chance.
Yeah, you don't get fully engaged architects anymore, and if that were to happen, that kind of culture coming back, that would solve a lot of problems, because when you have your stage 1 and stage 2, to answer the question before, you're there. When you're coming through the data entry points, they're all done because they're held with the architect anyway. but then the architect in a way becomes the project manager or contractor.
Yeah.
So the gateway process is much easier because they have sight of it from the earliest possible stage. At the moment, there's a gap between the whole of stage 3 and halfway through stage 4 before the contractor's even appointed and they get their teeth into it. So that would speed it up, going back to a culture where architects are fully engaged and they are the project managers as well as the designers. But
Absolutely.
And then you have a proper clerk of works function.
Yeah.
That, you know, if you have a look at some of the set piece aspects that you need to be doing, particularly if you've got at Gateway 2, if you did, you know, as someone suggested, you have a risk assessment of the really critical safety functions on fire and structural safety. What are the things that you can do as a clerk of works to actually evidence that those critical aspects have been put in place? And I appreciate Gateway 3, it's not just fire and structural, it's the whole raft of regs. But again, for each of those, how are you going to demonstrate to the regulator that you've achieved what was agreed in Gateway 2?
That leads in nicely to the kind of the next thought here, is that we've talked about one myth of construction entirely focused on just achieving the minimum level and jumping over the lowest bar they could possibly do. We've obviously seen there are, in the marketplace, there's particular manufacturers which talk about BSR compliance. I'd like to kind of, is that such a thing?
No.
Why?
Well, BSR don't like it. They get very jumpy about it. And the way I view it is, and it comes back to something we were saying earlier, something is, it can't be BSR compliant because they're not regulating manufacturers or anything like that.
and they don't have any skin in the game.
They're only there to manage
BRE
risk.
stamp.
They want to look at the risk. So we have this a lot, and you were mentioning earlier about membranes, you know, sandwiched between two combustible components. That wouldn't get past the BSR because the regulation requires, and it says it requires that each component in the external wall has its own fire classification, irrespective if it's sandwiched or not.
Yeah.
So you've got the BSR are looking at the risk purely.
The only thing I think I agree 100%. The only thing you could do is make something more, and I don't mean it as a literal term, BSR friendly. So if we was to take that kind of example that you were doing, and we was talking about standard details, if you had a Class A panel, a Class A panel, and a Class B membrane in between those, and it was a detail that the industry said this should exist, this is why, and this is how, and then the BSR has a proven record of accepting that detail, then the trade associations can go, this is a standard detail that is used throughout the industry that the BSR tends to accept, where you have a Class A, a Class B, a Class A, and it's...
Is it not dangerous? Because
You wouldn't do that any more than fire authorities would do, which says endorse smoke detectors going in homes. They just wouldn't do that.
So Ashley, what's your take on this question? Is BSR compliance a thing, or are we just talking about absolute rubbish?
No, it's not compliance. BSR and compliance wouldn't go hand in hand, wasn't it? It's the functional requirements. That's compliance, isn't it?
We can only report on what has been passed. And try to do what people have done before, rather than trying to come from a fresh approach. Like trailblazing, basically, is the path to delays.
But what are they going to say? They're going to say, "Well, is it compliant with the regulations?" Aren't they?
But it depends, because some regulations and details, I mean, that I've come up against, not that we necessarily do, is where people will use lots of different clauses and ways to get a system or a product onto a building site. Because some things are statutory, some things are guidance, and if they're guidance and you can prove that they satisfy a fire engineer, then the fire engineer signs it off, and you're fine. So
Hate that.
I thought that was.
Yeah, just
But
hello. Is that a fire engineer? Yeah. Would you mind just
sign
email
this
it
off
over?
for
Just
me.
sign this off.
Yeah.
Whoa.
But if you get a proper engineered decision and prove a case and do something to show that, I personally don't have a problem with that if it's consistent across everything in the industry. But we can only, you can't have BSR compliance or BSR approved, or you can only say this is what generally passes and this is what generally fails. And
I'm going to move the conversation. I'm conscious of time here, but just finishing on that point, the Office of Product Safety Standards, OPSS, said to me that they hate the word compliance being promoted as a marketing thing. It's a legal obligation. It's not a marketing benefit, right? And also, it tends to be used in connection with British standards, and that's fine. But the legal compliance is actually in relation to Regulation 7, Regulation Part B, the parts out of the Part B document. It's not actually a wide term, so it's very misleading in its context. So I'm just going to move that on to the next myth, which is, when does the Building Safety Act not apply? Neil.
Not apply.
Well, the Building Safety Act applies to all buildings.
Yeah.
And actually,
To all buildings, but it depends whether you're keeping it within the framework of the gateways, the gateway piece.
And that's what we would talk about here. And just for clarity, the reason it applies to all buildings is because it specifically states it, and it specifically says there are certain stuff which applies only to buildings above 18 meters.
Yeah.
However, things like proving competence, proving your organisational personal one, your duty holding responsibilities are not relative to the height of the building, are they?
Yeah, and really, the main difference is the enforcing body.
Yeah.
18 meter plus. You're looking at the BSR for looking across at my building control colleague over there. When you're below 18 meters, you've still got to go through much of the same stuff. It's just is a very different approach taken.
The approvals process wouldn't go through
exactly.
the BSR.
So it's the local authority piece. But the way I would encourage any construction firm to think about HRB stock and lower rise stock is treat that like the same concept as car manufacturers do with Formula One cars versus road cars. You can try out different techniques, particularly around things like the golden thread, BIM modelling, and things like that, on your HRBs in consort with the BSR. And if it makes financial sense, then you can roll that down into your low-rise stock as well. Same way as for power steering and ABS braking is ubiquitous, and you can't buy a car without it now. But that was first trialled decades ago in Formula One. That's the way I would encourage people to have a look at, and so that there isn't a two-tier system.
Yeah,
there's just a higher risk aspect, and that eventually the technology that you're applying and the methodology you're applying can.
And actually, in Wales, that has actually come in all buildings. It's not above the 18-meter mark anyway for a lot of requirements.
To carry that, because we won't have time, so that could be the next one maybe. But there are different thresholds of different buildings, like this 15-meter threshold if you're doing things like prisons, care homes, hospitals. So there's lots of other types of buildings. So I don't want to say that they don't apply to the Building Safety Act, but there are slightly different guidelines for different building types as well.
And one for you, Ashley. Can you simply, for those who talk about gateway approvals being planning consents, what is the difference between what is needed from a planning aspect and the gateways? Is it the same, or can you clearly explain the split?
Yeah, it is. I mean, Gateway 1 is the planning application process. So you're going through the planning approval at that point. From the Gateway 2, it's building regulations.
Yeah.
But as you say, the Gateway 1 sets the parameters by the developer, by the client, of what the fire safety performance standards will be. And it is a statement. It's a statement of intent that actually the planner should understand from you, that you understand what your strategy will be moving forward. It's how are you going to build it, what you're going to build it out, but not necessarily design aspects you're stating on that statement. I've been working under the 2019, 2020 and the London plan before the Gateway 1 template as such came out in 2021. So putting London plan fire statements through or forward, and you'd add there was 5 or 6 criteria, I think it's 6 criteria. And so there wasn't a depth or range of report, you know, how many words should that be? How many pages should that report? But because you tried to sit with those functional requirements, I saw them as those 6 criteria the London plan had. Was
Gateway 2?
Pardon?
So what's the difference between that and Gateway 2?
Well, then when the template came out, and I think it's August 2021 for fire statements, they're limited to words. I was thinking earlier on when you were saying about how deep, what depth should these applications should be, whether 1, 2 or 3 should be. Clearly the planners want something quite succinct and they could move on. So that's where there's a 200 or 300 words sort of limitation as far as how much do I need to know. If you say 1,000 words, that indicates that actually I need a little bit more information. If you're limiting that question to 200 words, a little bit like an exam side of it, job application, 200 words, then actually I know I need to make it quite short and to the point and not going into too much design detail. But you're saying you're going to discuss that in the next stage. Yes, absolutely. You said, Nick, doing the Gateway 2, then setting out, I think, as you say, you're moving through as a Gateway. You're at REBA 4 now. You're at REBA 4 now. You go for that Gateway 2. So clearly, you've set something out at REBA 1 under planning. Here at 1, you've limited it to 200 or 500 words under that 14 questions, something like that. Going to the Gateway 2, it's a little bit more because you got to technical detail. That's going to be much more depend on the complexity of the building, I suppose.
And then when you get to Gateway 3, it's looking back and saying,
And what have I done?
Planning,
How have I done?
intent, the what you've just said you were going to do, how's it been done, how's the changes been tracked, and does it really stack up, and is it safe to occupy?
Which is why what you were touching on at the beginning, how long should that Gateway 3 approval should be? You'd expect it to be less than 2 because they already know the building, and depending on that period of time, I suppose, and the BSR people moving on, and it's a different pair of eyes looking at that. So Gateway 3 of the same.
So if we're coming as a panel then and reaching a consensus on Gateway 3, there is obviously likely to be challenges as we get familiar with it. However, as we've discussed through, a lot of the work, the majority of the major kind of scoping out of what we're demonstrating, how we're reaching compliance and why this is a safe route and the best practice on other areas outside of life safety, are we concluding as a panel that whilst there is likely to be teething issues and uncertainty, both from the BSR point of view, but also the industry applying that, if you've said what you're going to do and you've delivered on what you've said you were going to do, Gateway 3 should not be as painful as Gateway 3.
Shouldn't be interested in you, should it?
You missed the part there. So it's not just said what we're going to do and deliver what we're going to do. There's an evidence piece. You've got to show,
demonstrate it,
that you have delivered what you said you're going to do. And that's where I think the biggest issue with Gateway 3 is going to be. If you haven't had that in your mind, that I'm going to have lots of photographic evidence and all that sort of, you haven't been doing that and you're approaching Gateway 3, how do you actually get that now?
That's a really good point.
Without banging your building about, you're in a really difficult spot then, and that's where I think that potentially the difference between Gateway 3 and 2 will manifest. If there are things failing at Gateway 3, it's going to be really difficult to get yourself out of it, because you're going to have to probably start doing destructive testing on your own building that you've just done, and
it comes the other point that you made earlier, which was building the building to Gateway 3 in mind of working backwards. Again, if it improves the behaviours of contractors, because you'd think that they would be taking photos as they go along anyway, and a lot of them don't. But if they're doing these things and gathering evidence as they are, it's also your way of showing competency, because at the end of it, if ever there's a thing, you can say, we are competent. Look, here is the screed, here is the facade, here are the through-wall pictures, here's the contractor, here's a competency statement from that contractor to say that this is how they were going to do it. And there's the evidence of them doing it the way that they said they would. It makes the whole culture better, improves the industry. Yes, it's going to take longer, but if that was a behaviour and a habit from the start, whether the building was big or small, it will get quicker and quicker and quicker as time goes by. I'd be quite positive about the industry and the whole process.
Do you think this is a great takeaway for anyone who's watching this who might be looking at making a gateway application for Gateway 2? If you're asking the right questions about competence, you should also be asking the questions of what's the process you're going to be using to capture the photographic evidence you're talking about of you building out your product or installing the product there, and the steps you're going to manage that process with, so that if I need the information, I can ask you for the information you got. It should be a question which contractors are asking. It should be a question designers are, shouldn't it?
And that should be done on every project.
I'm really sorry. I'm going to have to bring the panel to a close now, but what we're going to do is we're going to start off, Dan, perhaps with yourself, one key takeaway for the audience from your thoughts.
Kind of two, but rolled into one. Embed in our DNA why we are doing what we're doing and what the end goal is. So it is really part of what we do and how we do it. We cut ourselves in half. We can see that going right the way through. Understanding the risk management that you've been talking about, and to ensure that the hazard doesn't end up as a consequence. I think that is really, really, really important takeaway.
Good point. Thank you, Neil.
I'll probably the third time I've repeated it now. But it's the method I would want everyone to go away with. You'll make your lives a hell of a lot easier if you get yourselves out of your own lens and into the lens of the people that are going to be actually marking your homework. Get yourself into the lens of the Building Safety Regulator and the end client. And critically, do not forget that the whole reason we've gone through this is because we weren't keeping people safe. So if your approach isn't based upon that's what I've got at the forefront of my mind, not tick box exercising, then I'm afraid you're still going to have problems.
Ashley?
Not forgetting on that note, I mean, 40 years ago in the mid-80s, and this last year, this year, next year, so we've got anniversaries of some serious incidents, not just fire, structural safety and the like. So we've gone through, UK have gone through significant pains such as that. So legislation we did have, which was a result of incidents we had before. For me, takeaways: early engagement with the fire engineer, particularly Gateway 1 at that statement stage. And then if it's the Gateway 2, reviewing that Gateway 1, reviewing that fire statement. Am I still, and that much you're saying, that's what they do. If I was a regulator, I would, at 3, perhaps looking at 3, say, what did they say they were going to do at 1? And for me, again, that early engagement, that consistent engagement with the fire engineer, not just for producing reports, it's including on their DTMs and the fire design workshops, and not so actually I've got to, not just keep saying tick box. I've got fire, I've got a fire strategy, I've got one there, and I've got one there. And actually, fire engineer doesn't know what you've done in the last 12 months, what you've been talking about.
Wayne?
To be able to influence that.
My takeaways are I think the hazards and consequences are a great thing and they should be adopted. But I think that the gateways are a great way to potentially improve the culture and change the behaviours. And if people do, as we spoke about earlier, whether the building is high-rise or not, imagine it's Gateway 3 and that they're going to be showing evidence. They're going, as they're doing the buildings, they're recording things. When they're appointing the contractors, they're looking for competency statements and case studies and checking, have they done what they said they're going to do? And those installers are going to the manufacturers. Are your products exactly what you said they are, and tested how they are, and kind of working backwards, then it will improve the safety of it and of the whole industry. To use your Formula One analogy, ABS will be standard on all warehouses.
Thank you very much to all of you, and particularly thank you, Ashley and Wayne, for stepping in the breach when we had a couple of people drop out in the panel discussion. Your input has been very valuable. We'd like to summarise, I think, the key points we're seeing as there's definitely positivity in the Gateway process. The Gateway 2 in particular, the timing is coming down. The BSR do seem to be getting a grip of that. That said, it's far from over. The green shoots are yet to become trunks, and long-term change, we're still considerably above what the approval was set out to be as a 12-week one. And the challenges, the financial stresses remain amongst the SMEs and the contractors in the sector, and investors making things actually stack up and buildable. The real question remains, is Gateway 3 going to become the new Gateway 2? Hopefully we've brought a few points here of reality to actually look at this and hopefully giving people a bit more confidence. The remaining question, which we'll be looking to answer in the podcast we're doing on the NEO2, NEO3 scheme, which CISC built for Quintain, and the principal designer will also be joining that podcast, or Tomkin, which will be coming out in a few weeks' time. So watch this space. We'll be analysing that project, what was asked, what were the challenges, what was demonstrated, what was the evidence there in that process, and we'll be sharing some really interesting insights. So certainly have a look at that on there, but certainly a bit more positivity than this time last year, and hopefully next year we don't even need a conversation around the Gateway process. But thank you for everyone who's joined. Thank you for everyone who's asked questions. I'm conscious that we didn't answer all of the questions. What we will seek to do is have a discussion post this event and follow up with some further information. So keep having a look at the ResBuild social channels and where you should be able to do that. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining us, and goodbye from us.